featured speaker tonight, Mr. David Barton, comes to us from the great state of Texas, where, so I've heard, conservatives are not an endangered species. He's the founder and president of WallBuilders, an organization whose mission is to present America's forgotten history and heroes with an emphasis on our moral, religious, and constitutional heritage. A review of WallBuilders' published work makes clear the respect David and his group have for America and the principles on which it was founded. Did I say respect? Perhaps reverence would be more accurate. David is an illustrious scholar of history. Time magazine in 2005 named him one of America's 25 most influential evangelicals, alongside such luminaries as Billy Graham, James Dobson, and Jay Sekulow. David likely took that as a compliment, but given Time magazine's position as a fixture of the left-leaning mainstream media, it's not clear to me they meant it that way. David has built an enormous library of thousands of original writings created during the founding of the country. He's written numerous best-selling books whose subjects are drawn from that library, including such topics as America's Godly Heritage, Separation of Church and State, What the Founders Meant, the Second Amendment, Restraining an Overactive Judiciary, 4 Centuries of American Education. He's here tonight to talk about the Educational Standards Initiative, known as Common Core. A former educator himself, he was on the team of reviewers that created the renowned Texas Standards of Education, back when Common Core had not yet nationalized educational curriculums and turned over control of our schools, and thus our children, to federal bureaucrats. His background as a conservative, educator, and classical historian, and his manifest love for our country gives him a unique perspective to share on Common Core. Would you please help me welcome Mr. David Barton?
About Common Core. I think everyone's heard of it. Everyone knows something about it. I will say that if you want to know a lot about it, you can go to haltcommoncore.com. That is a website that is populated with things from across the nation where Common Core is in various states. Good news is that Common Core has really been turned around in the last few years. I was talking to one of my friends who's a state senator in South Carolina, and 3 years ago when he brought up a bill to get Common Core out of South Carolina, he got 1 vote. Last year passed unanimously in South Carolina, and he got rid of it. So that much change. The point where the Common Core originally started in Texas and Alaska were the 2 states that said, not us, leave us out of this. It grew to 5 states and stayed 5 states for a number of years, but now we're at the point where nearly half the states in the United States have put Common Core out or on hold or they're backing out. It is much bigger than merely a red state movement or a conservative movement. It is going in states that really surprise a lot of people. New York is really trying to back away from it. Nobody considers them a conservative or a red state. So there's a lot of things that are becoming evident to people. So anyway, allcommoncore.com has a lot of information there. It'll show all the groups across the country that are fighting this. What I want to do with the time that I've got with you tonight, and there's so much we can get into, and I don't want to get out of the weeds. I want to kind of keep it at the 30,000-foot level, look at the overview, look at the big things. And in doing that, let me take you to Common Core and some of the major problems. I want to take you through 8 problems right at the start, and then I'm going to show you what things used to be. It's a lot easier to know where you are if you know where you used to be, because you can measure some distance there. So I'm going to show you where we are, and I'm going to take you back as well. 8 problems, let me take you through them quickly. The first is the Common Core standardizes mediocrity and it lacks academic rigor. Their big thing, their selling point for teachers is this is a much more rigorous curriculum. This will help students. Well, the testing in New York is why you've got people in the blue state of New York saying, wait a minute, this isn't what we wanted. The scores have plummeted. We've gone through the floor. The same in Kentucky, Indiana, states across the United States. As they've started the testing, it has gone exactly the other direction. and it has standardized mediocrity, and that what it does is it shoots at students as a class and as a group rather than individuals. And so you have to take the median level of where all the kids are, and that keeps getting worse and worse. I'll give you an example. When we used to have the old one-room schoolhouses, wasn't it remarkable that in one room you could be teaching 3rd grade math at the same time you were teaching 8th grade math, and one teacher could do all of that, and then jump over and teach 4th grade English and 7th grade literature. And so we were very successful back then. If you doubt that, all you need to do is take the exit exams from back in the 1920s that were coming out of those one-room schoolhouses. It's postgraduate stuff today, those 8th grade exit exams. So you look at what we had back then, that's because we took every single student exactly where they were, and we wanted to elevate them. So we worked in that direction. If we have a 3rd grader, we're going to raise them a 5th grader, whatever it is, we're going to lift them up. Well, the way we have things now, and by the way, on average, we spend $164,000 per student for 12 years of school. So 12 years of public school, we average about $164,000 a student. And right now, 19% of all students who graduate in the United States are completely illiterate. They can't even read their own diploma. So for $164,000 a year, we're turning out 19%, or 1 out of 5 students that cannot read. Now, if you've got a class where the 20% or 19% of your class can't read, and you've got to teach reading, and you're not teaching it to individuals, you're teaching it to a group, what do you have to do? You have to factor in the fact that 20% of those kids are just completely incompetent with reading, so we've got to kind of lower things down so that we can keep the whole class together. And so what it does is it standardizes mediocrity because it keeps shooting from where the kids are in that class rather than taking them individually and moving them up. That's not good for the kids, it's not good for the state, it's not good for the nation, it's not good for any aspect. So that's the first problem. Second problem with Common Core is it undermines local and state controls and accountability. It abrogates federalism as well as parental rights. One of the things that's become clear in hearings that have happened across the nation in Michigan and in Georgia and elsewhere is the superintendents of public education states before the legislators testified and says, well, we can adopt Common Core, but if we do, and a parent get upset at something, they can't go to the teachers, and they can't go to the superintendents or principals, and they can't go to the assemblymen and senators. They're going to have to go to Washington, D.C. to get solutions. And so it becomes very clear that a local school, and you guys know one size does not fit all anywhere, not even California. Where you are in the Inner Valley is so different from where you are up north, from where you are south. When you start throwing all the other states, and you're going to have the responsiveness to local problems that you get out of the IRS or the EP or something else. And so what has happened is that has scared a lot of states into saying, wait a minute, we don't have any ability to change some of these things and respond to problems. No, they don't. And so that's the difficulty. And by the way, Common Core got started for 2 very good reasons. One was national mobility. We had 10% of the nation that moves every year. But the problem was that you could have a kid in Georgia move to Nevada. And when he was in Georgia in 9th grade, he was taking Algebra 1. When we got to Nevada, he's taking trig. And that's difficult on the kids not being able to fit into their courses. And you got somebody that moves from New York down to New Mexico, and they were taking pre-calc, and now they're in Algebra 2. And so the governors got together and said, well, we can work and do our sequencing kind of close together so that when kids move, they're in the same course, and the states will still control all the content, the local areas will still have all their stuff, but we can kind of arrange the courses. We can have a core of the courses and so that was part of it, was to deal with the issue of kids moving from state to state with their parents and not being penalized for their parents having to move. The second thing was the states were very clear that they wanted to reassert federalism because the Constitution only gives 15 enumerated powers to the federal government. And very clearly, the Constitution leaves education in the hands of the states. And so the governors said, we want to reassert state authority over education, so we, the state governors, will come up with a common core, and that way we can keep the feds from touching this. Now, it started with a good plan, but it did not end that way, particularly after President Bush had done No Child Left Behind. Then you had President Obama who came in and said, well, I'll let you out of the requirements, the testing requirements, No Child Left Behind. All you have to do is take this exemption for race to the top, and we'll give you federal funds if you'll adopt Common Core. And so it turned into something that became federal instead of states, moved in a completely different direction. So it undermines local and state controls and accountability, abrogates federalism as well as parental rights. You lose all the local controls. Third thing with it is, and by the way, I will point out that when the governors got together, they called it state standards. It was not a state curriculum, not by a long shot. Every state was going to do its own curriculum. Every state had its own ways of doing their curriculum. But it was just standards. It was that common core kind of thing where you have really a systemic kind of sequencing of courses. But from state standards, they started calling it national standards. Now, not a national curriculum, it's just national standards because we want all the states to meet these standards. And so that's when the federal government started getting involved. Now, the man who is head over the Education Committee in the House of Representatives, John Klein. John is a great guy. He's out of Minnesota, very conservative guy. I was talking to John recently and he said, you know, on the hearings we have now in the House of Representatives, when these educators and these guys from the federal Department of Education come before us, he said they don't call it state standards anymore. They don't even call it Common Core national standards. He said the term they now use is they call it a national curriculum. That's a bad thing. You don't want a national curriculum because, again, one size does not fit all. So that's the second problem with Common Core. The third is its implementation is costly for states and schools. It uses some really pretty radical, I don't say radical in the sense, well, I say radical in the sense of very different. It uses very, very different teaching methods. And so all your teachers that have been teaching for 30 years or 3 years or they just got out of college, teaching college, you've got to teach them different ways to teach. So you have to retrain every one of your teachers. For example, in the state of North Carolina, not particularly a popular state, the state spent $66 million generally in teaching it, and then each of the local districts had to do their own, like Charlotte spent $3 million in it. So you got hundreds of millions of dollars spent across the state of North Carolina to retrain the teachers on how to use Common Core, and then North Carolina started reading all the content and said, you got to be kidding, we don't want this. So they backed out of Common Core after they'd spent hundreds of millions to retrain teachers, but who paid for all the hundreds of millions? We did. It was our money that got thrown away, and that's happening all over the country now. Again, more than half these states have backed out, but they've had to spend a ton of money to retrain teachers because it's not normal stuff. You don't teach the normal way, you don't teach the normal technique. So it's very costly, which raises, again, our expenses as taxpayers. Fourth is it introduces new and untested educational methods and methodology. I mentioned that they're having to retrain teachers because it uses such a different way of approaching math and language arts and other things. But it was always presented as being something that they called internationally norm. Internationally norm, everybody else is doing it, this is out there, America needs to catch up with the world, we've got to do what the rest of the world is doing. And as you look into it, it turns out that, yeah, these techniques were being used in other nations. For example, in Russia, some of the trig techniques were developed by some mathematicians in Russia. And 20 years after that, they got rid of it because it didn't work. But that's all right. We can make it work in America. I mean, it may have failed for everybody else, but we're Americans. We can make it fail. So you find the same with reading techniques. They were internationally tested, and that other nations used them, but they rejected them because they failed. Well, they forgot to mention that, but they could point to the fact that they've got the support of the world because we're just doing what the other nations have done. So that's another difficulty. And that's what they're finding out is, you know, the testing scores have gone through the floor on this. And that's because they're using things that have never worked anywhere else. Kind of weird. And if you jump off a building in China, gravity takes you to the ground. If you do that in Moscow, it takes you. But in America, we can jump off a building, gravity won't take us down. It won't have any. It's kind of crazy that we think that we're exempt from certain laws that work elsewhere. And I don't mean laws in the sense of statutes. I mean laws of nature type like. Fifth is that data mining is particularly intrusive and dangerous to constitutional rights. This is what people think. We get black helicopter kind of thing. Oh, you're a conspiracist. This is melodramatic. Data mining, what happens right now is they use 400 different data points, biometric data, biographical data, and you go through all the 400 data points that they want from the kids, and they want from the kids to know about the parents' health and health care, the parents' political persuasion, how they vote, the parents' income, the parents' hobbies. They want to know everything about your siblings. They want to know your attitudes on certain different issues, and so they will test your attitudes, not on academic content, but on social issues, etc. And they say, well, we need this to be able to customize education for the kids. We want to be able to touch them exactly where they are, and we can customize this. And I'm sorry, but you don't need to know how I vote to be able to teach my kid math. And you don't need to know what my political preferences are to be able to teach my kid science. And so what happens is, as it turns out, these 400 data points are pretty much more than that. And they are being sold, and they can be sold to the highest bidder. It's a way that they can make income off of what your kids know. And people say, oh, that's not true. You're just being meddled. Well, interestingly, again, as these state legislatures have been, for example, Georgia just introduced one of the new states that introduced a law that says, in our education system, no data mining. We're going to respect the rights of privacy, and that information from the kids and their parents, that's theirs, and it stays there. You can't sell it. And everybody was saying, oh, data mining doesn't happen anyway. So why are you passing a law that says you can't sell it when it doesn't happen? Well, it's interesting to see who showed up to testify on this, and this law has been introduced now in a number of states. Interesting to see who showed up to testify. It was groups like Google who showed up and said, no, don't pass the law because we're using the information. We really like having information. Well, wait a minute. When Google shows up and they're defending the information they're getting from data mining, you're going to tell me it's not happening? Then why are they testifying in front of the legislature? So that's another difficulty with Common Core is the data mining. It's very intrusive, undermines your rights and privacy. The sixth one, it includes open and overt philosophical indoctrination in numerous specific areas. Now, we'll talk about indoctrination a little bit, how to define that. I've been appointed in a number of states by state boards of education to do their what are called social studies standards. That can range from 13 to 19 courses in the state. So, whether it's Oklahoma or Texas, I actually did them here in California a number of years ago, whether it was Alabama or whatever. It's interesting to see how indoctrination appears. And indoctrination often is giving one side of something and not giving balance. An example of this is recently doing standards in Oklahoma. And I'm a firm believer that in things like history, you just tell the facts. You teach the good, the bad, the ugly. You don't have to interpret that, and you don't create an agenda out of doing that. So as we were looking at the Cold War, all the teachers, a number of pretty liberal teachers said, oh, we got to make sure to get all that McCarthyism stuff in there. Of course, McCarthy, you know what that was? That was the witch hunt of the 1950s with McCarthy, a Republican senator from Wisconsin, browbeating all these hapless witnesses and calling them communists, etc. And the Senate eventually did the equivalent of the censure on him and called him down because of the way he was handling witnesses, including a famous military general that he just jumped in the middle of. And so they wanted to make sure and teach that, show how bad America is and how these conservative zealots are all right-wingers that are on witch hunts. And I said, fine, teach it, because it happened. I mean, the Senate censured him, he did it, and it was all wrong. But make sure you put in there the Monona Papers. And they said, the what? I said, the Monona Papers. What's that? Monona Papers, well, there was a secret project in the Intelligence Committee going at the same time McCarthy was doing this stuff. McCarthy didn't even know it was going. And it was monitoring all the spies that were in the U.S. government from communist countries. And all these spies that were there. And in 1995, they declassified all that top secret information. You found out, McCarthy was exactly right. And he used wrong tactics and bad personality to do what he did. But he wasn't on a witch hunt because there were all these communist spies that were documenting government. So, fine, teach the Cold War, teach McCarthy, but teach the Monona Papers as well. Oh, we can't do that. We don't like that side of it. No, that's indoctrination. When you don't want to put out what's actually happened, then you're in indoctrination. You're just teaching one side. So there's a lot of that. Let me give you some specifics. Now, the Common Core does not have history standards. It does not have geography standards. You have the literature, the English art standards. You have the math science standards. But what happens is they have what's called Common Core aligned curriculum, like this. And what they do is they take the teaching techniques and teaching philosophy of Common Core and they integrate it through all the other courses. And that's done at a state level, and it's done sometimes at the national level. This is one of those Common Core aligned world history textbooks. And this particular world history textbook, this is being used in Florida. It is 63 pages, 3 chapters in that book about Islam. There's none of that on Christianity, and none of that on Judaism, just Islam. And you learn that, fortunately, the Christians and Jews have screwed up the world, and Islam came along to save the world from those horrible Christians and Jews. Wait a minute. That's not even comparative religions. That's indoctrination. That's pure out. You study the Quran, you study the 5 pillars of Islam, nothing like that in Christianity or Judaism. That's indoctrination. That's a Common Core line. That's a problem. You shouldn't be doing that in courses. The same thing happens with this United States history book. This is Advanced Placement History. This is another Common Core aligned textbook. And they don't have the kids read the actual documents. For example, when they cover the Bill of Rights, they don't let the kids read the Bill of Rights because that's too easy to understand what it means. You need to understand what we think the Bill of Rights is. And so what they do on the First Amendment, they write it out as though it is the Bill of Rights, except it's their interpretation. They said the First Amendment guarantees the separation of church and state. That's not the First Amendment. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, prohibiting free exercise thereof. Congress can't set up a national denomination. Congress can't keep you from practicing your faith. That's not separation of church and state. And then the Second Amendment, they said the Second Amendment allows soldiers to own guns. Really? That's indoctrination. That's not even letting the kids read the actual document. That's putting their opinion in there. And that's what's very common with Common Core aligned standards is they have a philosophical viewpoint. And there's so many other examples I could go through, but that's one of the things that a lot of parents are not liking because, if the left can do it, the right can do it. No, just teach what happens. facts in it. It's real simple stuff. Facts speak for themselves. So that's part of the seventh. It's a supplementary and recommended reading material. Recommended materials contain much dark, depressing, and offensive content. Now, this is where literature and language arts kind of stuff really kind of shows out. These are 4 textbooks that are on the recommended reading list. They run from 9th grade through 11th grade. They're literature books. And what's interesting about all 4 of these books is they contain rape, incest, and pedophilia, very openly so, very graphically so. As a matter of fact, they are so graphic. Now, I don't know if you guys heard this, just backing up a minute. Interesting story over in Oklahoma. A senator in Oklahoma, Josh Burkeen, was standing on the floor of the Senate and just all of a sudden started reading explicit pornography. I mean, really graphic stuff. Of course, everybody's going, you can't do that. And right in the middle, everybody getting up and saying, oh, did I forget to mention? I'm just reading out one of the Common Core books. Did I not mention that? And it was one of these books. And, of course, that got their attention. So Oklahoma completely repealed the Common Core. They said, we've had enough of that. But it was... And that has happened now in a number of states where they just read out of the books. That's all they did, just read. And people are appalled. They can't believe that's... Because I don't care what your political viewpoint is, I think we can safely say that so far, rape, incest, and pedophilia are not common shared American values. I mean, but we're not even telling kids they're illegal. That was one of the questions asked one of the authors. Said, you got some really explicit incest in here, brother-sister kind of stuff, and father and daughter kind of stuff, and the rape, and it's really graphic. I mean, the way you describe it. But you never even said it was wrong. And the author responded, well, in case kids were doing that, I didn't want them to feel bad about what they were doing. Really? That's the values we're inculcating. So that's why I say that it contains dark and depressing materials and information. The 8th one is it reshapes all education, including private, Christian, charter, and homeschools by means of testing criteria. As more and more parents, and by the way, teachers are increasingly turning against Common Core. I think it was last year that the Gates Foundation, which has been a big funder of Common Core, they did a survey of teachers and they said, oh, we need to back off Common Core for a while because teachers are now overwhelmingly turning against it. I think I saw 70% of the teachers in Iowa now oppose Common Core. So across the nation, we're seeing that these numbers change significantly. So what had happened was, as people find out what's in there, the indoctrination, the other things, they're taking their kids out of school. So they don't want that. And they're putting them in homeschools. And by the way, this is pretty amazing. In North Carolina, this has happened so much that you now have more homeschoolers in North Carolina than you have all forms of private education combined. That's never happened before. So, parents are pulling their kids out, protecting them. I'm going to protect my kids from this nonsense. But that really doesn't work that way. It's a nice sentiment. It'd be nice if it did. But it doesn't work that way for the simple reason of testing criteria. Because you see, the kids that go to homeschool or Christian school or parochial school or private school or charter school, they want to go to college, which means they got to take the SAT or the SAT or the ACT test, most likely. And the problem is those two tests said we're going to test for Common Core materials, Common Core knowledge. That means if you're a homeschool, Christian school, private school, charter school, parochial school, and you don't know the Common Core nonsense, you're going to score 100 points lower on your test, which means you don't have the same choice in college as everybody else gets. So private schools are now saying, man, we want our kids to compete at the same level, have the same choice of schools. So they're starting to adopt a lot of the Common Core nonsense because that's what the testing drives them to. And by the way, testing is what drives everything in education right now. What's called high-stakes testing came in a couple of decades ago. Everything hinges on that. Teachers' salaries, teachers' merit pay, and how much money the school gets depends on how the kids do on the test. So you now teach to the test because they got to get good scores or it affects me in my district, and et cetera. And so because of that, testing drives everything. Well, that's what you get now. And the College Board is the big one. College Board, the SAT test. And the head of the College Board is David Coleman. David Coleman is known as the architect of Common Core. He's the guy who put all this stuff together and has over the past years. He's now running College Board, and can you believe it? He actually thinks the SAT test should reflect Common Core standards. I can't figure why he would think that since he created Common Core. So he's announced that that's what the SAT test will do. So what happens if you're going to take the SAT test, you better know all that indoctrination stuff or you won't get the right answers, and therefore your kids will come out with lower scores. So the pressure of testing is now driving other forms of education where parents thought they were getting the kids out to protect their kids are now finding that they're being forced back into it because of the testing competition that goes for colleges. Now, this is an example of how that works. This is the AP United States History Test. The AP test is about 460,000 kids a year that take it. This is for advanced play. These are the really sharp kids at school. These are the ones who are likely to be your national leaders. This is the last history course they will take in high school generally. 460,000 kids will take it this year. And the College Board also does the AP test. I think there's 46 different AP courses. And so the College Board does that. That's David Coleman. Oh, that's back to Common Core. And that's what they did. So what they did in realigning the testing on the AP thing for Common Core, they took the really short, because prior to this, the testing guidelines they gave for AP testing in history said, teach them about the American Revolution, teach them about the stuff, just really general stuff, and then you put the content in and the kids go take the test. Not now. They've replaced that short little outline with a 142-page manual that tells you specifically what those kids are going to have to know on the test. And as you go through the 142-page manual, it is amazing to see what's in there, or better yet, what's not in there. What are the kids not going to be tested on? Because again, you teach to the test, and you've got a 142-page teaching, 142-page manual on what the test is going to be. That's what you're going to be teaching all year long, because you know exactly what your kids are going to be tested on, so that's what we're teaching. And it is quite fascinating that when you look, Founding Fathers are gone. Jefferson's not there, Franklin's not there, John Adams is not there, Madison's not there. Founding Fathers didn't exist in American history. They're nowhere in the AP testing to be found at all. As a matter of fact, the American Revolution didn't even happen. You can forget the Battle of Lexington and the Battle of Bunker Hill. You can forget about the Battle of Saratoga. You can forget about Yorktown. None of that happened. It's not there because we're not testing on it. So we're not going to teach this because you don't need to know anything about the American Revolution or the Founding Fathers. And by the way, Civil War? No. There's no Lincoln Douglas debates, Emancipation Proclamation, Gettysburg Address, no assassination of Lincoln. Civil War didn't happen. It's just not there. And as proof of that, there are no military heroes. Ulysses S. Grant or Robert E. Lee, neither one of them are there. There is no major military battle in the Civil War. It's all gone. That is the thing that is fascinating. And I've had a number of teachers tell me this in their teacher training. We're told specifically you cannot mention any military battle, you cannot mention any military officer or hero. So it's gone. I mean, it just didn't happen in American history. That's what teachers are being told they cannot say. So the Civil War is gone, and in the same way, World War II didn't happen. D-Day does not appear anywhere at all, nor does the Battle of the Bulge, nor the Battle of Midway. All these things that shaped World War II are gone. They're out of it. And on top of that, look what else is gone. All the military heroes. No Dwight Eisenhower, no George Patton, no Douglas MacArthur, no Chester Nimitz. All the military, because again, we're not teaching battles, we're not going to teach military guys. We don't even present a single medal of honor. No heroes of any kind. We don't have military heroes. We just don't do military stuff. And not only that, Hitler's gone. We don't even teach Hitler. We don't teach the Holocaust. The Holocaust does not appear anywhere in the standards at all. That's not part of World War II. You guys have been misinformed if you thought that was World War II. It's not there. If you doubt me, just look at the AP test because it doesn't. This is indoctrination. I mean, this is stuff that everybody agrees should be taught as part of history. It's what happened. So you've got that, and civil rights, you can forget that. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, neither one appear. So the modern civil rights movement is now gone. Lots of other stuff. I mean, I just keep going. Same with business. There's no free enterprise. There's no small business. There's no middle class. There's no entrepreneurship. None of that, which has always been a part of America, the entrepreneurship, individualism, creativity. It's all gone. Free enterprise. We don't do that anymore. So these are the things that have been taken out of the test, and there's 142 pages there that you're going to teach, but it's not going to be about this stuff here. This is what you will not be tested on. You're not going to get tested on any of this stuff right here. Now, this 142 page, I mean, and by the way, let me kind of expound on something for just a moment. Let me take you to this one thing they do talk about. They talk about us dropping the atomic bomb, and this is a statement. I said they didn't do anything military. They did. They do this. And with it, this is what kids are tested on. It says, the decision to drop the atomic bomb raised questions about American values. So what you will find is we're the nasty people that drop the atomic bomb, and that shows how terrible American values are. What kind of values do you have if you go? All right, let me back up for this question about American values. What's that deal with? Let me take you back to World War II for just a minute. World War II, do you know how many people died as a direct result of World War II? Any guesses? About 60 million. There's about 60 million deaths in World War II. Of those 60 million, about 40 million occurred in Europe and about 20 million occurred in the Pacific. So you get about 40 million deaths in Europe, as you know, the Nazis and Mussolini, etc., as they move across throughout Europe, about 40 million deaths. Now, those 40 million deaths in Europe, that's where we did the D-Day thing. We said, all right, we're going in, we're driving these guys out, we're giving people their countries back, we're giving people their liberty and freedom back, we're getting the death machine out of here. And it cost millions of lives to do that. Some of you guys may have been in the military. You know what they call that operation? It's called Operation Overlord. That's the code name they used, Operation Overlord. We're going in, we're doing D-Day, and we're spreading out from there, and we're going to drive these guys out. We're going all the way to Berlin, we're bringing everybody along the way. So that cost millions of lives. But once they got that done, they said, we got to do the same thing in the Pacific, and that was called Operation Deadfall. It's Operation Deadfall. We're going to have to send our troops. We're going to take them out of Europe now, except the occupation troops. We're going to have to ship them over to Japan. We're going to have to invade the mainland of Japan. And that's not going to be an easy place to invade, given the suicide mentality the Japanese had at that time, the kamikaze, etc. They're going to be willing to die to defend their country. This is going to be a really costly battle. So all the military estimates from all the allied nations, so they looked at the cost of that, and they said, well, what's it going to cost us in the way of lives? The projections to invade Japan put the Allied losses at several million. The American losses specifically were going to be 500,000. We have a daily radio program heard across the nation, about 200 stations. And about every 2 weeks, we'll interview some military guy from somewhere. And a lot of them are World War II guys. And one of these World War II guys that we were interviewing was actually part of preparing for this, because they sent a whole bunch of American troops to the islands surrounding Japan, and they started assembling caskets. And they had to assemble 1 million caskets because they knew probably 500,000, could be up to 1 million Americans would die if we invaded Japan. And they were assembling mobile hospitals, kind of those quantum type things that they could throw together. And right as the Americans would go into Japan, they start setting up these hospitals right behind them where you could bring all the wounded troops. So this is the Operation Downfall. And the total losses, what are you going to have the Japanese losses when we invade? They said, well, it depends on how violently the Japanese fight back against that. Will they say, hey, we don't like the way this is going, we're not going to fight you, we'll give you the country. But the estimates all range somewhere from 5 to 10 million Japanese deaths. The low end was 5, the high end was 10 million. So you're looking at somewhere they figure between 4 and 14 million deaths is what it's going to take just to end the war. You've already had 20 million in the Pacific theater. That's going to take another 4 to 14 to end it. So when Truman got all that information, he said, that's an easy decision, and he dropped the 2 bombs. Those 2 bombs were devastating, no question about it. The 2 bombs themselves killed 150,000 individuals. 150,000 more died as a result of radiation. Now, that's 300,000 deaths versus somewhere between 4 and 14 million. You want to tell me what the problem with American values is on that? 300,000 versus several million? I don't understand why that raises questions about our values. And then our values are so lousy that we actually went in and rebuilt the place. And we gave them a very prosperous nation, free nation, and an economy, and they're one of the top. I don't understand what our problem is with American values. You just haven't read the Common Core Line test, because there's definitely a problem there. See, this is why the indoctrination side comes out, and this is what kids will be tested on, which means that's what they'll be taught as well. So that's why what happens in this test is so significant, what happens in testing. Even if you think you can protect your kids from Common Core because the way testing drives everything, it's a really bad deal that's going on. Now, having said all that, if you hate America, you will love Common Core, because that is the tone you get throughout. We're the ones who are depraved, as you saw in that Islamic book. Fortunately, it was the Muslims who saved the world from Christians and Jews. That's the tone that comes throughout, and that's just not a very healthy, positive tone. Now, having said all that about Common Core, I'm a cowboy, I'm from Texas, we got the ranch, the horse, all the stuff that goes with it. And we use a lot of colloquial kind of language, but for us, doing this thing with Common Core and thinking that it's going to make a difference is like putting lipstick on a pig. It just ain't going to do it. I mean, you're still going to get a pig out of this thing. You can call it anything you want to, you can dress it up the way you want to, it still will be a pig and it will stink when it's all done. And that's what Common Core is. It's a dog chasing its tail. And this is not going to fix education. That will come right back around 10 years from now and say, what are we going to do to fix education? Scores are way too low. Yeah, you have to drop them with Common Core. Again, that's why so many states are getting out of it. What I want to do is now take you back and show you backwards some on the other side, because if you look at early American education, I love the thing that President Abraham Lincoln said about education. He said the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. Really true. But consider what we're going to be teaching Common Core, and are you going to want to live under that 20, 30 years from now? Will anybody? Probably not. We will look exactly like Europe. All the exceptions will be gone, because we're guilty of all of the world's atrocities. Nobody did anything evil in the world except us. We did it all. That's why we go around the world apologizing for America. So the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation, the philosophy of government the next. I want to take you back to what the philosophy was in early American education. Philosophy of early American education had three objectives. Those three objectives were very simple. I'll take you through them. The first objective was to teach religion, morality, and knowledge. The second objective was to teach thinking skills. And the third objective was to have high expectations. Now, I'm going to talk about the first two first and then show you the examples of the third. So let's go back to this first one, to teach religion, morality, and knowledge. Once we finished the American Revolution, once we had the Constitution in place, this is the first Congress under the Constitution, 1789. We now have a constitutional republic. We've got a federal Congress. The federal Congress undertakes to deal with an issue that they had at the time. That's we got 13 states, but we got a whole lot of people living out here that aren't in the states. We got people in the Ohio Territory, the Northwest Territory, the Southern Territory, and they're eventually going to want to be part of the United States. How do we let them become part of the United States? And so to set forth the provisions for statehood in the United States, if you want to be a state, they passed what was called the Northwest Ordinance. The House passed it on the 17th of July, 1789. The Senate passed it on the 4th of August, 1789. George Washington signed it into law August 7th, 1789. The Northwest Ordinance is one of the 4 organic laws of the United States. To this day, you're not allowed to violate these 4 laws. These are the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, Article 6. These are the supremacy laws. The Constitution, the Declaration, the Articles of Confederation, and the Northwest Ordinance. And the Articles of Confederation are in there because the Constitution says any agreements we made under the Articles of Confederation have to be carried out. Well, that puts a constitutional imprimatur on it. So those are the 4 organic documents no law is allowed to violate. It's significant that in this one, they dealt with education. Now, by the way, they said if you want to be a state in the United States, get 40,000 your territory. Once you do that, set up a Republican form of government. Here's how your judiciary has to work. Here's how, and they went through everything, and they said, here's how your schools have to work. Article 3 of the Northwest Ordinance very simply said this: religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. Because religion, morality, and knowledge is necessary to government and mankind, that's why we have schools, to teach religion, morality, and knowledge. That religion, morality, and knowledge clause is significant because in addition to 13 states, the next 32 states that came in put you up to 45 states. That was the requirement. You couldn't be part of the United States if your schools didn't teach religion, morality, and knowledge. And I can show you state constitution to this day that still have that next state constitution. Forever the public schools of this state, religion, morality, will be taught as well as knowledge. It's there because that was a requirement to become a state in the United States. So that was one philosophy of education. Teach religion, morality, and knowledge. The second was to teach thinking skills. We had books like this. This was used for about 150 years in our schools. The improvement of the mind, teaching you how to think. We did this through a lot of exercises. One of the exercises, a very popular exercise, this is an old textbook. They're called forensics. Now, quite frankly, I didn't know what these were. You know, I thought I knew what forensic was because I watch TV and I watch all the crime shows, so I know what forensic is. I had no clue what this is. And this is John Hancock and Robert Trupain, the guys out of that era. This is the list of lessons that they had to do in school. So all these are forensics. Now, forensics, again, I wasn't real familiar with the term, but forensics is a Latin term that goes back to 1650, and it means to learn the art of public argumentation. And here's the way that they went at it. This is how they taught kids to think. Let me take this one right here. Forensic. Whether the conduct of the patriots who destroyed the tea in Boston Harbor in 1773 is to be condemned. Teacher walked in class and said, okay, here's the deal. 1773, we had the Boston Tea Party. Is that behavior that should be praised or that behavior that should be condemned? All right, you take praise, you take condemn. Go after it right now. That's all the preparation you got. It doesn't matter what you believe. You got to find the weaknesses in the other guy's logic and be able to knock his stuff down. You got to learn the art of public argumentation because that way you have to learn both sides. And then we'll reverse it and you go the other way. Now you're for it, you're against it. When we take two different, see, this is forensics, teaching you how to think, teaching you how to recognize weaknesses in logic and thinking and how to be able to point those out. And that's why when you, I have a friend who's the dean of a law school, and he says, you know, all you attorneys, you're going to take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And the best commentary on the Constitution is the Federalist Papers. So no one graduates from this school without reading the Federalist Papers. He said they all come back and said, that is the most difficult book I've ever read in my life. And he tells them, I understand that. That book was not written for someone at your educational level. He said the Federalist Papers were letters to the editors for New York farmers in 1788. He said maybe someday you'll know as much as New York farmers used to know back in those days. That's what the Federalist Papers were. They were letters to the editors written for New York farmers to show them why they should support the Constitution. That's the commentary. See, what a difference it was when we had thinking back then. Some of the others, for instance, I associate with no one, I employ no one who's not of my party in religion and politics. That's not a right or wrong answer to that, and that doesn't matter. The thing is learning how to think, learning how to recognize weaknesses and be able to argue your point. Here's another one. Is there less danger in believing too much or too little? Which is more dangerous? Let's argue that one for a while. Is there more to be gained or lost by a new translation of scriptures for common use? These are the things, and by the way, this is the argumentation. This is what 12 and 13-year-olds did. This is 12 and 13-year-old lessons. So this is how we were teaching thinking in that day. So we taught thinking skills, and because of that, we had high expectations. Now, let's go to what happened, because we said, you know, we need to change some of this stuff. It's time to have some change in education. We've been doing this 300 years. Let's do something different. And so what we said is, now we don't want religion, morality, and knowledge anymore. U.S. Supreme Court, in the case Engel Vital, 1962, said, this thing about voluntary prayer and scriptures, we're not doing that anymore. Education is supposed to be secular. No more of this religion and morality anymore. And if you don't have religion and morality, it turns out you don't have much knowledge a lot of times either. And I'll show you some stats on that in a minute. But we got rid of anything dealing with religion, voluntary or otherwise. And thinking, we said, oh, we don't want to do that anymore. And the way we changed thinking skills is the progressives came in and said, well, we need to change the until 1920, you only had 8 years of school. 1920s, progressives get it, and we need 12 years of schools, and it needs to be compulsory. We're going to force you to learn whether you like it or not. You don't have a choice in this. And so we totally changed the way we did schools. Now, progressive educators, there's a lot you can point to. Robert Ingersoll was the leading one, so was Parker. You got the same thing with Lester Ward. You got Herndon, Kilpatrick, you got John Dewey. I mean, all these guys went in and reshaped education. One of the big things they said is, we need to move away from this thinking, and we don't teach kids how to think, teach kids how to learn. Because learning is more important than thinking. But notice what it does. The emphasis on thinking is the student. The emphasis on learning is the teacher. So what we did was we moved from an emphasis on the student and moved to an emphasis on the teacher. Because, see, we want the kid to learn how to think. No. We want the teacher to teach you what you should learn. And so by moving from thinking to learning, we put the emphasis away from the student and on the teacher. Now the teacher is the center of the classroom. She's the source of all knowledge. This is the same time period where we changed the way we tested. Suddenly we came up with things like fill in the blank, a true, false, and multiple choice, because we want you spitting back what the teacher told you. The teacher will tell you what to believe and think. You just spit it back out. And this is the best way to do it on this kind of testing. It used to be essays and argumentations and oral lessons, and you had to be able to defend your point. Not anymore. That's thinking. We want you learning, not thinking. So this is a huge change that occurs. So thinking goes out the door. That's not part of what we want anymore. And when you get into learning, that makes you very dull, because then you just accept whatever you're taught. I read it on the internet. It's got to be true. No, because that's how you get open to indoctrination, because you don't know how to think. You don't know how to look at the other side. You don't know how to argue the other side and point out the weaknesses. So that's where indoctrination becomes very possible, because now you put emphasis on thinking and emphasis on learning. And there's a very big difference between the two. So the results of the change, if you look at the SAT score, the SAT score, we've had it since 1926. And if you look at all the decades of the SAT score, it's interesting that those decades up until we took out religion, morality, and knowledge, 62, remember the court did that? Here's where we were, go back to 1926. happened at that point in time. They went right through the floor. Apparently, religion, morality, and knowledge go together, because we take out religion, morality, knowledge now through the floor. So that's a difficulty. As I mentioned earlier, literacy, we used to be number 1 in the world in literacy. America has fallen to number 65 in the world in literacy. And as I pointed out, we have 19% of our kids who cannot read their own diploma when they graduate. That's not good. We didn't have that problem before. One of the things we also do is we have international, we do a lot of international testing. And 17 out of the last 19 years, America comes in dead last in the world in international testing. Math and science, we just get our brains beat in by Thailand, by Romania, by Bulgaria, all these third world nations. We finally had a change. Recently, we saw a change in international testing. The results in international testing, they reported very happily. Our elementary kids, for the first time in a long time, were finally testing above average. Now, our junior high kids were only at average, and our high school kids were well below average. Let me think that through. If you've had a few years in American schools, you're really smart. If you had a few more years, you're average. A few more years, you're way below average. That caused the American School Board Journal, this is a secular group, 16,000 school districts in America. The American School Board Journal, this is what they report. The longer U.S. students stay in school, the less they seem to know. Now, having gone through all of that, when we taught thinking and when we taught religion, morality, knowledge, we had high expectations. But now we don't do that anymore. Our expectations, we say, kid, if you'll graduate from high school, if you'll go off to college, and if you'll get a really good job, maybe by the time you're 25, you can start being a little productive. And, you know, maybe at that point, here's what we need from you, quite frankly. If you'll become a taxpayer and pay taxes, and if you'll stay out of prison, you are a perfect citizen. That's exactly what we're looking for. That's not high expectations. But that's where we are in the culture. That's the message we send our kids. Stay out of prison, get a job, pay taxes, you'll be a great citizen. Let me take you back to what it was when we had these other 3 traits. Again, religion, morality, knowledge, training students to think, high expectations. Let me take you through some famous Americans. This guy right here, Fisher Ames, he is one of the framers of the Bill of Rights. He is in the first Congress. He's the guy who actually gave us the House language of the First Amendment of the Constitution. Fisher Ames, brilliant guy. I mean, really cool guy. Fisher Ames entered Harvard University when he was 12 years old. Now, don't be impressed with that until you hear what goes on. Every university you attended back then, Harvard or Yale or Dartmouth or William & Mary or Princeton or, didn't matter. You had the same entrance exam to every university. You had to be able to prove that you were trilingual. You had to be fluent in Latin and Greek and English. English, obvious. Why Latin? Because you read all the classics in Latin. You read Homer and Cicero and Plutarch. Why Greek? Because the freshman project at every university in America was they gave you a Greek copy of the New Testament. You had to be able to translate from Greek into English. He did that at 12 years old. Again, don't be impressed, because the average age at which you went to university back then was 13 years old. So he's only a little smarter than the rest of his peers. You have folks like Benjamin Rush, signer of the Declaration. John Adams said he's one of the 3 most notable founding fathers. He's called the father of American medicine, the most famous physician in American history. He found cures 200 years ago we still use today. He graduated from Princeton when he was 14 years old. Anybody feel comfortable going to a 14-year-old doctor today? That's all we had back then. John Trumbull. John Trumbull's on the Supreme Court of Connecticut, great literary figure in AP literature classes. You'll read John Trumbull's works, great founding father. When he was 4 years old, he had finished reading the King James Bible through cover to cover the first time, at the age of 4. By the way, that wasn't unusual. John Witherspoon, a signer of the Declaration, President Princeton, when he was 4 years old, he'd already read the Bible through from cover to cover. That was very common back then. When he was 6 years old, he beat his minister in a Greek contest. When he was 7.5 years old, he passed the entrance exam at Yale University. Now, his parents said, that's a little young, we'll hold you out until you're 12. And they did, and that's when he got to go to school. 13. He was 13 when he went to Yale, because that's when everybody else went to school. You got folks like James Iredell. He ratified the U.S. Constitution. George Washington put him on the Supreme Court of the United States. Washington did. When he was 17 years old, he's a chief financial officer in his part of North Carolina, running all the public finances at the age of 17 in North Carolina. Then you got people like Maria Mitchell. She is the first woman in the United States to discover a comet. She was really into scientists and the astronomy. She loved them. She created this observatory for women. She taught women how to do academics and science. And she's just really great. They still have her telescope. It's a really cool thing to see, this telescope she has. But Maria Mitchell, when she was 11 years old, was a teaching assistant in astronomy at the age of 11. When she was 12 years old, she calculated the time of a forthcoming solar eclipse. Do that without calculators and computers. 12 years old, she says, you know, 4 mushrooms a day, 4:17 in the afternoon, we're going to have to pull this off. You're kidding. A 12-year-old did that? Yeah, absolutely. We taught them how to think. So at 17, she's running her own school in math and science. Then, Pony Express, I told you I'm a cowboy, I love these guys. Pony Express, let me show you a poster of Pony Express. They go from St. Joe, Missouri to California in 10 days or less. Now, understand what that is. St. Joe, Missouri, out here to California in 10 days. That's 1,800 miles. Now, my horse and me, if I ride that horse 30 miles in a day, that horse is worn out, I'm worn out. These guys average 180 miles a day on horseback. Unbelievable what these guys do. 10 days, 1,800 miles. Now, let me show you the rest of the poster. Pony Express, St. Joe, Missouri to California in 10 days or less. Wanted. Young, skinny, wiry fellas. Not over 18. Must be expert riders willing to risk death daily. Orphans preferred. Wages Not over 18. See that? Not over 18. And one of the most famous Pony Express riders was this guy, Bronco Charlie. He was 11 years old as a Pony Express rider. 180 miles a day on horseback, having to fight off outlaws and storms and cross rivers. Yeah, that's what we did back then. 8 years old, he's already a professional blockbuster. Yeah, I do rodeos. I love watching rodeos. I've never seen an 8-year-old blockbuster. That's our culture today versus what America used to be back in the day. One more example. John Clown right here. He's a hero of the Battle of Chickamauga. Actually, what happened back then was your local newspaper would talk about heroes of the state of the city. He happened to be out of the state of Indiana. So the Indiana Register, February 10th, 1864, this is the article they have. And then John, his nickname was Little John. Little John Clown with the Army of the Cumberland, promoted for bravery by General Rosecrans to sergeancy, has been further promoted by General Thomas to lieutenancy and placed on his staff. So, for bravery in the battlefield, he has now been promoted to a sergeant, and then General Rosecrans said, no, I need you, Rosecrans promoted him, and then Thomas said, I need you on my staff, your lieutenant. He's been 12 years old. This is a picture of him. That is John Clown. And he got promoted from there to be the 12 years old lieutenant. In case you think I'm making all this up and I'm just picking the best, I'm going to close with these. This is the Webster Blueback Speller. For 150 years in America, you learned to spell out of this book, 1782 to 1932. I want you to know elementary spelling book. Everybody see that? Elementary spelling? Here's your elementary spelling words. Now, I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce them because I don't have a clue what they mean. But I do know that for 150 years, this was elementary spelling for every kid in America. And then if you want to go past spelling, let's go to geography. For example, here is a geography test. This is from Chicago, March 27, 1862. It is 4th grade. You have 35 minutes for this. Let me show you 4th grade questions on this test. How many degrees of longitude are there? How many degrees wide are the temperate zones? Name the principal animals in the frigid zones. What portion of people in the globe are pagans? What portion are Christians? 4th grade. How about math? 1862, 6th grade math. You ready? Let's do some 6th grade math questions. Here you go. I insured 2/3 of a shop worth $3,600 and 4/5 of a house worth $6,000, paying $126. What was the rate of insurance? 6th graders. Easy stuff. Here's one. How many $50 shares at 8% discount must be given for 23 bonds, $100 each at 2% premium? 6th graders. And in case you think that's too hard, let's just do some mental math. You can't use pen and paper on this. This is called mental math. It's 1877. We're still talking 6th grades here. 6th graders. Here's mental math. This in your head. A boat worth $864, in which 1/8 belonged to A, 1/4 to B, and the rest to C was lost. What loss did he sustain having been insured for $500? In your head. Oops. Well, I moved it off. Anyway, you get the idea. This is the way it used to be. That's what happened when we taught religion, morality, knowledge, taught kids how to think. We had high expectations. That's the problem with Common Core. All you got to do is look back at what we did in America for 300 years with education and look at where we are now. It's real easy to see it's not where it's supposed to be. Thank you guys for letting me share with you. Use that one. question answered for a few minutes. Won't keep you long. Joel, what do we got?
All right, so we got some ushers passing out index cards. So anybody who has a question, please grab an index card. Please try to write your question legibly. Legibly. Have mercy on me, I got to read them. While they're doing that, I've got one or two that I can start things off with.
And Joel, stop me when it's time to quit. I'll keep going as long as you ask questions.
Sounds good. So I'm curious about this notion of what I might call affirmative action in literature. Sort of the denigration of white male authors in favor of people of color, females, irrespective of the actual quality of the literature. Can you comment on that? Is that connected at all with?
Yeah, one of the difficulties we have with affirmative action is the difficulty we've had for about 50 years, and that's we've moved away from individuals and moved into the concept of having groups. We don't recognize people as individuals. It is called post-structuralism. It's been taught at the universities about 40 years. One of the things we did in Texas, and we got our brains beat in by the levels in Texas because we wanted to do some sound history standards. And when we were doing it, they came to us. There were 6 of us that were appointed by the State Board of Education to supervise those standards and come back with the overviews, etc. And they said, now you make sure that whenever you teach a hero, and we specifically in Texas, we bring out about 250 heroes from our history, from all aspects. And they said, make sure you say what group they're from, because we want to make sure we have diversity here. And we told them, ain't no way. Here's the deal. If they did something significant, kids need to know about it. We don't care who they are, what color they are, what gender they are. If they did it, we're going to tell the kids. Well, the teachers who came to us and said, be really conscious about group. Out of those 250 individuals, only 9% came from minority groups. When we just threw it out the door and said, if they did something significant, we're going to teach about them, it went to 27% were from minority groups. 3 times as many simply because we said, if they did something significant, let's talk about it. When you do that, you start finding out about people like Wentworth Cheswell, first black elected in America during the American Revolution. He's one of the writers, along with Paul Revere, black and white, side by side, saying, hey, America, wake up, the British are coming. You learn about people like Prince Estabrook, who stood right beside John Robbins, black and white, side by side, fighting the British in the Battle of Lexington. I mean, so many things. The first SEALs were black and from Rhode Island, but we never talk about that because that would make America look good if we had blacks fighting in the Revolution. No, we got to start with slavery and move into it, and then we start looking at groups. And so the problem is we look at groups. Affirmative action is losing the consciousness that you want to take every single individual, pull out the worth in them, elevate them from where they are, and let them do significant things. If you do that, you don't need affirmative action. You just elevate everybody where they are. Works.
Can you talk about the authors who wrote Common Core?
Who wrote Common Core? Really, there were a number of people who did it over time. There were several committees and groups. There was some influence. Bill and Melinda Gates funded a lot of educators. Of course, David Coleman, we talked about, was one of the guys who kind of guided philosophically where it went. But it's kind of evolved over time, and they're still writing it now. They take criticism, try to pull something down, and put something else up. This test that they've done for AP history, they're going to get their brains beaten over that, and as a consequence, a number of states have said, and by the way, I think, this is how states can hit them. This is what we're working with state legislators on. All you got to do is hit them in the pocketbook. You see, what happens is every one of those 460,000 kids that takes that test, depending on the state, they're going to pay the college board somewhere from $70 to $105 per kid who takes it. Well, in Texas, we have 45,000 AP history kids. So we simply tell AP College Board, our kids aren't going to take your test. We'll make our own test without great cost. And AP College Board goes, oh, that's $4.5 million. We can't afford to lose that. So as they start getting the pressure of economics beat around their heads, they're already changing some of the stuff, and it'll conform. So there's really no individuals that I point to as really being that significant. There's some philosophical views, and what comes through is their worldview. They don't like America. They don't like traditional history. But the individual authors, they vary.
What can we do to get rid of Common Core if our county does or state has adopted it?
It's a slow education process. Eventually, that there's several ways of going at it. In politics, we have what we call POM, P-O-M, perception of majority. If you can go to them and say, guys, I don't know why you're so far out of step, but here's all these blue states, here's all these liberal Dems, here's all these things, and they're saying Common Core is bad.
where are you? What's your problem? I mean, if Maryland's going, and you start listing the states that are going against this, and put them in, if you start listing conservative states like Texas and Alabama, Oklahoma, it's not going to impress most guys out here. You got to list some of their own guys that are going in opposite directions. And even the fact that Bill and Melinda Gates are backing off of doing it now because they're seeing the polling that was done last year, those are all things you can do to help push in that direction. The other thing you can do is create relationships with these guys. You'll find that by and large, most folks, they only hear, elected officials usually only hear from most folks when they're mad. If you'll take a little bit of time, take somebody out to lunch or whatever, create a relationship, and over the next 6 months, educate them on Common Core. Say, hey, here's an article you might be interested in. Do not try to cram a steak down your mouth. Just feed them a little at a time. And once they trust you and learn from you, they'll start listening to you. And we see that with legislators all the time. So create a relationship, start educating. That's another very successful way.
All right, here's a couple of questions that are connected. Has anyone launched a free market alternative to the SAT? And are any colleges rejecting the SAT and ACT? I suppose you could extend that to be, are any colleges accepting alternatives?
There are colleges that accept some alternatives, but most colleges do not reject the SAT or the ACT. We're working with a number of states now to try to create some alternatives. For example, Oklahoma wants to create an alternative. And so what we do is say, hey, you've got a lot of good universities there. Oklahoma State University, you got the University of Oklahoma, you got Oral Roberts University, you got Shawnee Baptist, you got universities all over the state, southeastern Oklahoma. Get your props together, have them come up with a really good test and use it for all the kids in Oklahoma. And say that if you pass this test and you're in the top 10% or whatever, you get tuition free to state university. And so they're creating an incentive type thing. You can think outside the box. And there's ways to do that. One way is you don't pay those groups for taking the test. You create your own test, or you create your own local test. Some districts are doing that as well. They're creating their own local test. So there's a lot of innovative ways of going at solutions.
You talked about the expense of the training for teachers of Common Core. Can you comment on who's receiving these training fees? Are they the same people who are advocating implementation?
The training fees usually go to the trainers because, quite frankly, in the state of North Carolina, you send people out. You get people trained in Common Core who then have to go teach all the teacher groups all across the country, all across the state to do Common Core. And you have to give them teacher manuals. So by the time you get all this stuff printed, you get it collated, you get it put together in notebooks, you have the mileage drive into every school district across North Carolina or whatever your state is, it runs up. And so it's not like anybody's making a lot of money on the deal. They may be, but generally it just goes to the expense of having to send your people first to get trained themselves, and then second, to go to every school district in the state and spend the time to do a full in-service day or 2 days or 3 days or whatever it takes. And it's just an expensive process to retrain every teacher in the state, and that's what they're having to do.
All right, you touched on a similar question before, but what advice would you give a school board member in starting the conversation about Common Core? What resources are there to help him or her?
If I was a school board member, I would get the stats that are going and I'd make it all about the kids like they love to do. I would say, look at the kids in Kentucky. Look at the kids in New York City. Look at the kids. And I get the testing that's out there because it's all over the country. I'd say, I'm really concerned about our kids here in whatever the town is. And I'm seeing what's happening here. This is not good. And you start bringing those bad stats out as an official, as a school board member, and all you got to do is raise the question. By the way, remember that's how Satan got Adam and Eve off. They just raised the question. Did God really say that? All you have to do is raise the question. And so one of the most effective things you can do is start raising questions. Let somebody else ask them, but if you start raising, remember that's what forensics work. Forensics, you make them think. You ask questions that make them think. That's one of the best ways I would do it as a school board member. I'd get myself loaded up with stats, and I wouldn't try to teach them. I would just say, I'm sitting here, I'm looking at the most recent scores here from Nevada, and boy, since Common Core, their scores are really falling. This worries me. Should we be worried about this in our district? Just ask that question, and that'll make them think.
Where would parents get a look at the books used for teaching Common Core?
Oh boy, there are so many. There are what they call Common Core aligned, and we found a lot of difficulty. It's how to say this. It's very different from state to state, school district to school district on what books are allowed in the state. For example, in the state of New Mexico, a school district can choose any textbook it wants for anything. They have 4,900 approved textbooks in New Mexico. In Texas, we only have about 8 or 9 approved textbooks in any subject, because our deal is we won't, if you use an approved textbook approved by the Texas Board of Education, then the state will pay for all the textbooks for your school. Now, you can have any book you want to, but you got to pay for it yourself. And so districts generally want those books bought for them. So in Texas, I think we have 60 or 70 total books that are approved by the State Board of Education. But see, in Texas, you cannot get an approved textbook unless it meets every one of the standards that we wrote. If it deviates anywhere, you don't get it. So publishers write to our standards because they want to sell their books in Texas. It's different. So depending on what the situation is, as to whether the state helps fund the districts or helps partially fund the textbooks, or whether the districts are such to go out and buy themselves, everyone's going to be different. Generally, there is a right for parents to see the curricular material that's there. You have taxpayers paying, and by the way, it doesn't have to be parents. If you're paying school taxes, you got a right to see what's being used in school. You don't have to have kids in school to go ask for that. So just say, I want to see, is our curriculum common more aligned? Can I see the history book? Can I see the math book? Can I see the science book? Just ask those questions. And they should be able, they should let you do that. If they don't, we deal with a lot of national legal groups that will be happy to talk to your school board for you.
All right, I got a couple questions asking about saying, okay, you told us a lot about what's not in the history test or not taught by Common Core. Can you talk a little more about what is taught there?
Good question. A couple of things stand out to me. And let me just give you guidelines for it, because I'm going to recommend you go download those off the web and read it. 142 pages. It's PDF. You can download and read it. What I always look for when I'm judging history books or standards is whether they create tone. History doesn't have any tone on its own. You have to inject tone into it. And so the way you ask questions like American values with the atomic bomb, that's tone. You create the tone. You're causing kids to ask questions. It's the tone that comes through as much as anything else. There's a lot of examples of American atrocities, and American atrocities that occur. By the way, a lot of good stuff happened in America too. And so I don't think I mentioned this group. Forgive me, I was on a TV program earlier. But did I mention what happened in the school boards in Denver, around the Denver area? Okay. What happened was the school boards around the Denver area, Aurora, and others started looking at the materials and said, this is really negative toward America. They said, you can teach this, but we want you to teach positive things about America too. And the teachers all walked out of the school and said, they protested and said, we're not going to teach positive things about America. And the kids walked out of the school and supported the teachers. We don't want to talk positive things about America. So when the school board simply said use balance, it's all this negative stuff, use balance, teachers walked out. So that's tone, and that's what you look for. I would recommend that you download the PDF of the AP placement test. It's called APUSH. APUSH, AP-US History. That's the acronym, APUSH. You can download that 142-page APUSH test, look at it, but watch for tone, and watch. That's the other thing you always watch for, is you watch for what it doesn't say, not what it does say, what it doesn't say. For example, if I say that Abraham Lincoln dropped a nuclear weapon on Vietnam to end World War III, everybody would laugh at that. But if I don't say anything about Lincoln in the entire history standards, you wouldn't notice it. See, what happens is if I say blatantly wrong things, you see that. But if I just don't talk about Lincoln, nobody notices that. So you have to start saying, all right, let's see, are the military guys, and I look for 18 or 19 strands of history. I want to see what they did with faith. I want to see how they covered that across 400 years of American history. I want to see what they did with military history. I want to see what they did with family history. I want to see what they did with business history. I want to see what they did with entrepreneurialism and individualism. I want to see what they did with education. And so when I start looking at strands like that, I find out the civil rights movement did not start until Martin Luther King in the 1960s. No, it started back with the second load of slaves that came to America, the Pilgrims, in 1643, when they freed all the slaves and imprisoned all the slave owners. That was the start of the civil rights movement. So there's 300 years you got to look at. Those are things you look at when you look at history standards.
Something you very briefly touched on in your answer to the last question. How do the teachers' unions feel about Common Core? Where are they in this battle?
You know, the teachers' unions are coming around with this. Part of it is because they hate high-stakes testing. And Common Core is built on high-stakes testing. High-stakes testing puts a lot of pressure on teachers, a lot of performance. Some kids don't take tests well, they say, and therefore it makes the teachers look bad. So a lot of unions are coming around in this simply because of the high-stakes nature of Common Core, high-stakes testing nature of Common Core. They don't like the testing driving everything. They want the teacher to drive things, not testing. And so that's surprisingly finding a lot of support from unions on this.
Okay, again, a couple of related questions. Can you talk about a little bit more about the intrusive data mining and which states are taking steps to protect the privacy of this data?
Well, I wish I could. I do not remember the states right now. It is so far been mostly conservative states, but the blue states are starting to look at it too, because the right to privacy is what blue states yell more than the red states. And so when you make it a privacy issue, but the problem with blue states is that they've not been convinced it's an issue yet. But watching Google show up and testify in the red states has made them nervous. So I really can't tell you now what states. I've kept up with it, but I just don't remember right now. There are a number of articles on our website, that haltcommoncore.com website, that will talk to you about the data mining, where it is occurring, the 400 biometric points they look for. That stuff is there. So I would send you to haltcommoncore.com.
All right, this one's going to test your forensic abilities here. Can you tell us anything good about Common Core as it's implemented?
Yeah, there are several good things in it. It's just the bads outweigh the good. They have one of the things that I can agree with that is good is they want more informational reading, and that is they want kids reading more of current event type of stuff. Therefore, they have kids read things like presidential executive orders. I don't object to that. I do object to that when it replaces Mark Twain with Red Badge of Courage or something else. And so there are good things in it. I commend their desire to want more rigorous stuff. It's just they haven't done it yet. But there are good things in Common Core, and a lot of that is also pointed out on the website as well. It's not that everything's bad about Common Core, but it is that you get more bad than good, or the danger of the bad is more serious than the benefits of the good. And a lot of it is neutral too. Some of it is just flat ambivalent. I mean, there's only certain ways you can solve an algebraic problem. Now, some of the teaching methods they've introduced are really kind of crazy. On that website, we show you examples of how they are now teaching the new teaching methods. It'll scare you just to see what they're doing. And one of the things they point out is none of the parents know how to do any of this. So it puts the kids totally back to the teachers and getting all the information. When you have a problem like 36 times 29, I guarantee you parents, you cannot solve that problem the way they use new teaching methods now. You don't have any clue how to do it. So that's another thing. The answer will be the same, but the method they get there is not good. And we have from teacher training sessions them showing how teaching teachers how to teach these new teaching methods. It's crazy, far out, it's crazy.
All right, I'm going to paraphrase from this question. Suppose we get somebody elected in 2016 who's seen your lecture here and understands it and agrees with it. What can that person, that president, do? Or is the fight really in the legislature, the state legislatures, in other parts of the government?
Well, there's several things that can be done. One is the House did it last session. You may not be aware, but the House passed, I think, 387 bills last session the Senate refused to take up. And it's not that it was those conservative Republicans cramming stuff down at the Senate Democrats. 200 of 387 bills passed unanimously in the House. 60 of those bills were introduced by Democrats, and about 73 or 74% of them passed with a veto-proof majority, maybe 2/3 of the House. One of the bills that passed was the House defunded any federal funds with any effort that deals with Common Core. They just shut it off, completely shut it off. Now, the Senate wouldn't touch it. Harry Reid wouldn't pick it up. But I guarantee the House is going to pass it again. This time it's at least going to get a vote in the Senate, what the President does with it. So the answer is yes. The President can zero line out in his budget Common Core. Do it, the House can defund it. The House has the strings, Article 1, Section 8. A lot of things can be done federally to do that, and you can strip that power right out of the federal government by the federal government giving it back to the states. Two more questions. Sounds good. All right. So you talked about the explicit and dark content of a lot of the Common Core literature. Where could a parent get a look at the list of things their kids are being exposed to? Again, on the website, haltcommoncore.com. Those eight things I went through real quickly, they're all a tab on the website. And so the dark, depressing, offensive content you'll find there, and you'll be able to see it. And you can then go to your school and find that if you're using any of those books. And by the way, there's more than what we point out, but those are the most popular books across the board.
All right, last question here. What can parents here in California do for their elementary school kids who are stuck in a government public school?
Teach them twice. Do not assume that they're getting an education when you send them out the door. When you get them home, you start teaching them again. And the way I recommend, my thing is history. I like history. We own 100,000 documents from before 1812. I have 1,000 handwritten documents, Jefferson, Washington, Adams, etc. What I recommend highly is teach biographical history. One of the reasons that people hate history today is it has no purpose and it's full of dates and places. We should teach stories. You want to learn about the American Revolution? You read the biography of George Washington, Abigail Adams. You read Wilbur Chesley. You wanted to read about the Civil War. You read Harriet Tubman. You read Frederick Douglass. You read Lincoln. And that's the best way of getting a real-life perspective on what works and what doesn't. So I would encourage you at the elementary level, get into using biographical history. Have your kids read biographical books. We have a series on our website known as the SOWER series, S-O-W-E-R. We have about 60 biographies on the website of great American heroes. They're for elementary up through about junior high level. There's a group called Nest Entertainment, a bunch of former Disney animators that went out and took history and told stories out of history that contained character traits. So you learn courage from the Pilgrims. You learn innovation from Ben Franklin. It's Disney quality stuff. So there's some good stuff out there for kids. Do not assume they get an education when you send them off, especially don't assume they get values education. They get anti-values education. So you raise them with character. You let them read stories of people who have character. Let them see morality in history. Highly recommend biographical history. WallBuilders.com. We've got a whole section of biographies of American heroes. And wherever you find it, it's good stuff to teach kids. Thank you guys for letting me share with you.